My husband is a celebrated local hero who saved a child from a house fire 10 years ago. I just found his old journals. He started the fire. Our town loves a good hero, and for the last 10 years, my husband, Daniel, has been the best one we've got. His heroism isn't abstract. It's forged in fire and memorialized on a small bronze plaque in the town square. Daniel Porter, it reads, for his selfless bravery on May 12th. Everyone knows the story. I've heard it 100 times, and my heart still swells with pride at every retelling. The Miller House, a two-story colonial at the end of Maple Street, went up in flames just after midnight. A faulty space heater, they said. Daniel was driving home late from a business trip, saw the smoke, and didn't hesitate. He kicked in the door, crawled through the blinding, choking darkness, and found 8-year-old Liam Miller unconscious in his bedroom. He carried him out, his own arms scorched, just moments before the roof collapsed. He saved a life. He became a legend. That single act of bravery defined the next decade of our lives. Daniel, who had been a quiet, unassuming sales manager, was suddenly a local celebrity. He was the Maple Street hero. The act unlocked something in him, a confidence and a charisma I had never seen before. It propelled him into a successful run for town council. He started charities. He gave speeches at school assemblies about courage and community. Our life, once a quiet, predictable path, transformed into a sun-drenched parade. And I was the proud wife of the man on the float, waving to the crowds. Our marriage was built on the foundation of that night. I fell in love with a quiet, kind man, but I built a life with a hero. His bravery was a fact, as solid and real as the house we lived in. It was the central pillar of his identity and, by extension, mine. I loved him for it. I admired him for it. It made me feel safe. Today is the 10th anniversary of the fire. The local paper ran a front-page story, a decade of heroism, how one man's courage continues to inspire our town. There's a picture of Daniel, smiling his humble, confident smile, his arm around my shoulders. We look happy. We are happy. This afternoon, I was in the attic searching for old photo albums. The Historical Society wanted a picture of Daniel from before the fire for a new display. The attic is our archive of forgotten things, a dusty, dimly lit museum of our life before it became a public story. I was digging through a trunk of his old college things when I found them, tucked away at the very bottom beneath a moth-eaten sweater. A stack of 5 leather-bound journals. I'd never seen them before. They were from the years just after college, the years before he met me. I smiled, a small, private smile, a secret glimpse into the man before the hero. I sat down on the dusty floorboards, the air thick with the smell of old paper and time, and I opened the first one. His handwriting was messy, hurried. The entries were filled with the anxieties of a young man trying to find his place in the world. Frustrations with his dead-end job, a feeling of being invisible, a desperate, aching need to be someone. It was a little sad, but deeply, recognizably human. I skimmed through years of mundane entries until I got to the journal from 10 years ago. I flipped through the pages, looking for the date, May 12th. I found the entry for the night before, May 11th. It was short, the handwriting tight and jagged. Another dead end. Lost the promotion. Barely making ends meet. Sarah deserves better than a nobody. A man should be more than this. A man should be able to make a mark on the world. I feel like a ghost. Sometimes you have to make your own opportunities. You have to build your own stage. My heart ached for the man that he had been, so lost and insecure. I turned the page to May 12th, the day of the fire.
I expected a frantic, adrenaline-fueled account of the rescue, but the entry was written in a calm, steady, chillingly lucid hand. I read the first sentence, and the floor of the attic, the foundation of my house, the very ground of my life gave way. I found the perfect house today. Old wiring, a blind spot from the street. The family has a kid. It's important there's a kid. I bought a cheap space heater this afternoon, the kind with the frayed cord. It's time to stop waiting for a fire and start one of my own. The air in the attic, once just dusty and still, became thick and suffocating. Each mote of dust a particle of the lie I had been breathing for a decade. I read the sentence again, and again. My brain refused to assemble the words into their horrifying meaning. It's time to stop waiting for a fire and start one of my own. It felt like a line from a cheap thriller, a piece of dark fiction he had invented in a moment of despair. It had to be. The man I knew, the man who organized blanket drives and coached Little League, the man who cried during sad movies, was not capable of such a monstrous thought. My hands trembling, I flipped back a few pages. It was all there, a meticulous, damning breadcrumb trail. Entries detailing his drives through different neighborhoods, casing houses, noting which ones had overgrown bushes that could hide someone, which ones had older cars that suggested a family that might not have the money for the latest smoke detectors. He wasn't just venting his frustrations, he was planning. This was a blueprint. Denial, a powerful, desperate instinct, surged through me. This was a story, a novel he was trying to write, a way to process his feelings of failure. That had to be it. I clung to that possibility like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. I turned the page, my breath catching in my throat. I was desperate to find the next entry, the one that would say, "What a dark thought I had last night. I could never do something so terrible." I needed the retraction. I needed the proof that my husband was the man I believed him to be. The next entry was dated May 13th, the day after the fire. It was written in the same steady, lucid hand as the entry before. There was no remorse. There was no fear. There was only a chilling, triumphant clarity. It's done. I feel calm. The waiting was the hardest part. Crouching in the miller's bushes, watching the space heater I'd plugged into their outdoor outlet begin to smoke against the dry siding. The smell of it. Acrid. Promising. When the first real flames caught, my heart didn't race with panic, but with a strange, powerful sense of purpose. I gave it 10 minutes, long enough for the smoke to fill the second floor, long enough for it to be real, but not so long that the structure would be lost. Every second was a calculation. My stomach churned. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to put my hand over my mouth. This wasn't a story. This was a confession. Going in was a performance. The smoke was thicker than I expected, the heat a real living thing. That part was not an act. The fear I felt was genuine, but it was the fear of an actor on opening night, not the fear of a man running into a burning building. I found the boy, Liam. He was small, limp, a prop in my story. Carrying him out into the flashing lights of the fire trucks that were just arriving, into the gasps of the neighbors, it was exactly as I had imagined it. They looked at me, and for the first time, they didn't see a failure. They saw a hero. Sarah will be so proud. My life starts now. The journal slipped from my fingers and landed with a soft thud on the dusty floorboards. The man I loved hadn't just saved a child, he had endangered one. He hadn't run toward a disaster, he had created it. He hadn't found his courage, he had manufactured it. The entire foundation of our life, his career, his identity, our marriage, was built on the near death of a child. Liam Miller, who was now a high school senior, alive and well, because Daniel had decided he should be. He had played God, and our town had canonized him for it. The pride I had carried for 10 years curdled into a black, sickening horror. Every award he'd received, every respectful nod from a stranger, every time a child looked at him with awe, it was all based on a lie, so profound, so monstrous, it defied comprehension. The hero of Maple Street was a phantom. I was married to the man who had created him. A sound from downstairs shattered the silence of the attic, the familiar sound of the front door opening and closing. "Sarah," Daniel's voice called out, cheerful and strong. "I'm home. The newspaper interview went great. They're talking about maybe naming a park after me." My blood turned to ice. He was here. The author of those horrifying words, the architect of our town's favorite story, was standing in our hallway. I was trapped in the attic, surrounded by the evidence of his crime, the air thick with the dust of his lies. I looked down at the open journal on the floor, at the calm, steady handwriting that had just set my world on fire. He was home. The hero was home. And I was completely, utterly alone with his secret. "Sarah, you up there?" His voice was closer now, at the bottom of the attic's pull-down stairs, the cheerful, easygoing tone of a man without a single dark cloud in his sky. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I was a trespasser who had stumbled upon a secret burial ground, and the groundskeeper was calling my name. My mind raced. I couldn't let him find me up here, sitting amidst the evidence of his sociopathy. The journals were an accusation, their open pages a silent scream. I scrambled to my feet, my movements clumsy and loud in the quiet attic. I snatched the open journal from the floor, shoved it back into the stack, and stuffed all 5 of them deep into the trunk, burying them under the old sweater, a flimsy shroud for a monstrous truth. I slammed the heavy lid of the trunk shut, the sound a definitive, echoing thud in the silence. It sounded like a cell door closing. "Just a second," I called down. My voice is a high, thin thing I barely recognized. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force a mask of normalcy onto my face. I wiped the dust from my hands onto my jeans and pulled the string for the attic light, plunging the room and its secrets back into darkness. Descending the rickety attic stairs felt like coming down from a different plane of existence. I had gone up there, the proud, happy wife of a hero. I was coming down as the sole, unwilling keeper of a terrifying secret. Every step was a conscious effort to keep my legs from shaking. He was waiting for me in the upstairs hallway, his face lit up with that familiar, easy smile. He was still in his suit from the interview, looking handsome, confident, every bit the town hero. But I didn't see a hero anymore. I saw a performance. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The confident posture seemed rehearsed. I was seeing the man from the journals, the man who knew how to build a stage. "There you are," he said, stepping forward to kiss me. "Find what you were looking for?" His lips on mine were a violation. I flinched, a small, involuntary recoil that I tried to cover with a cough. No, not yet," I managed to say, my voice still tight. "It's a mess up there." I brushed past him, desperate to put some distance between us. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Everything okay? You look a little pale." Just dusty," I said, forcing a weak smile. "I think I stirred up some allergies." It was the first of many lies I would have to tell, and it felt clumsy and foreign in my mouth. I went into our bedroom, Daniel following a few steps behind.
The room, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. His presence was huge, suffocating. I busied myself with a meaningless task, folding a pile of laundry that was already folded, my back to him. I could feel his eyes on me. "So, the interview was great," he began, launching into a story about the young reporter's earnest questions, about the respectful way everyone at the newspaper had treated him. He was basking in the glow of his own myth, completely unaware that I was now standing in the ashes of it. I listened, making the right noises, a hum of agreement, a small laugh, but my mind was somewhere else. It was in a dark yard on Maple Street, watching a man in the shadows plug in a faulty space heater. It was in a smoke-filled room, watching him lift a small boy into his arms like a trophy. Every word he spoke was filtered through the horrific new context of the journals. His humble recounting of the rescue now sounded like a villain, boasting of his crime. His talk of civic duty and courage was the empty rhetoric of a con man. And they want us to be the guests of honor at the Founders' Day Parade this year. Isn't that something? "That's wonderful, honey," I said, my voice a monotone. He finally seemed to register that something was truly wrong. He came up behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. I went rigid. His touch, which had always been a source of comfort and safety, now felt like a brand. "Sarah, what is it?" he asked, his voice losing its cheerful edge, replaced with a note of genuine concern. "You're a million miles away. Did something happen?" I had to get out. I couldn't breathe the same air as him. I couldn't stand here and pretend that the world wasn't a smoking ruin at my feet. I spun around, my carefully constructed mask of normalcy crumbling. I'm sure my face was a canvas of horror and disbelief. I have a terrible headache," I stammered, grabbing the first plausible excuse I could find. "I think I need some air. I'm going for a walk." I didn't wait for his reply. I brushed past him again and fled, grabbing my keys and my purse from the entryway. I practically ran out the front door. The need to escape, to be anywhere but there, was a primal, overwhelming force. I got on my car and drove, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel.
I had no destination. I was just driving, trying to outrun the truth that was sitting in the passenger seat beside me, a horrifying, silent passenger. I was the wife of a monster who believed he was a hero, and I was the only person in the world who knew the difference. I drove for hours, the familiar roads of our town twisted into a foreign, hostile landscape. Every landmark was tainted. I passed the town square, the bronze plaque bearing Daniel's name, now a monument to a grotesque lie. I passed the high school and thought of Liam Miller walking its halls, a young man whose life had been a pawn in my husband's desperate game of self-creation. I saw Daniel's face on a banner for a charity 5K, his heroic image smiling down on the town he had so perfectly deceived. He wasn't just part of this community, he had built his throne at the very center of it. My mind was a battlefield. One part of me, the logical, horrified part, screamed that I had to do something. I had to go to the police. I had to tell someone. The journals were proof. This wasn't just a moral failing, it was a crime, an arson, a child endangerment. But the other part of me, the part that had loved this man for over a decade, was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the fallout. What would happen? Our lives would be obliterated. His reputation, his career, his very freedom, gone. But it wouldn't stop there. The scandal would gut this town. It would tarnish every charity he championed, every good deed he'd ever done. And I had to believe, or I would go insane, that some of them had been genuine. It would make a victim of every person who had ever looked up to him. And Liam Miller? What would this truth do to him? To learn that his life had been saved by the same man who had almost taken it? The psychological damage would be incalculable. And then there was me, the wife, the woman who had stood smiling by his side for 10 years. Would anyone believe I didn't know? I would be seen as either a fool or an accomplice. My life would be defined by his crime. I would be the wife of the monster, a pariah in the town that had once celebrated us. My safety, my home, my identity, it was all tied to his lie. To expose him would be to immolate myself. I finally ended up in the parking lot of a sterile, anonymous supermarket in the next town over. I sat in my car as the sun went down, the dashboard lights casting a pale, sickly glow. I felt a cold, creeping shame. My husband was a monster, and my first instinct was self-preservation. I was weighing a child's life, the integrity of a whole community, against my own comfort and safety. The thought was horrifying. Had his corruption already seeped into me? My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Are you okay? I'm getting worried. Please just let me know you're safe. I love you." The words "I love you" were a twisted parody of the sentiment. What did he love? He loved the wife of the hero, the woman who reflected his own greatness back at him. He didn't love me. He loved the role I played in his story. I didn't reply. I thought about the journals, locked away in the trunk in our attic. They were the only thing that separated my sanity from his fiction. Without them, it was just my word against his. And who would the town believe? The quiet, unassuming wife or the celebrated hero of Maple Street? I knew the answer. The journals were everything. A new, cold resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. The stakes were too high, the consequences too explosive. I needed to think, to plan. But I couldn't go home either. I couldn't sleep next to him, couldn't pretend that everything was normal. I couldn't look him in the eye without seeing the fire, without seeing the calculated evil in his own words. I started the car and drove to the only place I could think of, a small, cheap motel off the highway. I paid for a room in cash, using the emergency $100 bill I kept tucked in my wallet. The room was bleak, smelling of stale smoke and bleach. The bedspread was thin and scratchy. It was a lonely, desolate place, and it felt like the safest place on earth. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the room lit only by the flashing red of the vacancy sign outside my window. The weight of my discovery was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The hero I had married was a fiction. The life I had lived was a lie, and I was trapped. To tell the truth would destroy everything, including myself. But to live with the secret, to stand by his side at the Founders' Day parade and smile and wave, that felt like a damnation of a different kind. I was caught between two impossible choices, and I had no idea which one would burn me alive faster. I spent 2 days in that bleak motel room, a self-imposed exile. My phone was a constant, buzzing source of anxiety. Daniel had called a dozen times, his voicemails evolving from concerned to confused to hurt. He texted constantly, a barrage of "I love yous" and "please come homes" and "what did I do wrongs?" He had also, I saw, called my sister and my best friend, recruiting them into his search party. My friend, Jessica, had left me a worried voicemail. "Hey, it's me."
Daniel's going out of his mind. He thinks you've left him. Whatever's going on, you can talk to me. Her words were a tempting offer of comfort, but I couldn't take it. How could I explain? My husband, the man you all admire, the man who was the best man at my wedding, isn't a hero. He's a sociopath who nearly barbecued a child to feel important. The secret was a poison I couldn't share without poisoning everyone else. On the third day, I knew I couldn't hide forever. Hiding was the act of a guilty person, and while I felt a universe of complicated, terrifying emotions, guilt was not one of them. I needed to go back, not to resume my life, but to retrieve my evidence. The journals were the key. Without them, I was just a hysterical woman. With them, I had the power to detonate the truth, whether I chose to or not. I needed them in my possession. I formulated a plan, my mind working with a cold, detached clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I would go back under the guise of reconciliation. I would invent a story, a personal crisis, a feeling of being overwhelmed, a midlife wobble, anything that would explain my disappearance without revealing the real reason. I texted him. "I'm sorry for scaring you. I've had a lot on my mind. I'm coming home now. We can talk." His reply was instantaneous, a flood of relief and love. "Thank God. I'm not going anywhere. Just come home. I love you." The drive back to my own house felt like a spy returning to enemy territory. Every familiar street was a reminder of the life that had been stolen from me. When I pulled into the driveway, he was already opening the front door, his face a mask of profound relief etched with worry. He rushed to me as I got out of the car, pulling me into an embrace. "Sarah, I was so worried. I thought—" His arms around me were chains. I forced myself not to pull away, to play the part. "I know," I said, my voice muffled against his chest. "I'm so sorry. I needed to think." I walked into our home and it felt like a stranger's house. It was a stage set, and I could see all the props, all the carefully placed furniture that made up the backdrop of our perfect life. I spent the rest of the day in a masterclass of performance. I told him a vague, rambling story about feeling lost, about questioning my life choices, about the pressure of being in the public eye. It was all nonsense, but it was the kind of nonsense a loving husband would accept. And he did. He lapped it up. He held my hand, told me he understood, promised that we would get through whatever this was together. He was so supportive, so kind, so perfectly playing the role of the devoted husband that it made my skin crawl. He wasn't just a monster. He was a brilliant actor. And for the first time, I realized that I was too. That night, I lay in our bed, a chasm of cold air between us, and feigned sleep. The next morning was a Saturday. I knew he had a standing 9 a.m. tea time with the mayor. It was the centerpiece of his weekly political schmoozing, my window of opportunity. He got ready, his movements full of a renewed, cheerful purpose now that his wife was back. He whistled as he put on his golf shoes. He leaned over to kiss me goodbye, his lips brushing my forehead. "I'll be back around 2, he said. "Maybe we can have a nice lunch, reconnect." "I'd like that," I lied. The moment I heard his car pull out of the driveway, my own performance began. I threw back the covers and went straight for the attic stairs. I pulled them down, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I scrambled up into the dusty darkness, a small flashlight clenched in my teeth. I went straight to the trunk, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the latches. I threw back the lid. I dug under the old sweater, my fingers searching for the hard leather spines of the journals. My hand hit the bottom of the trunk. It was empty.
Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. I tore everything out of the trunk, old clothes, yearbooks, dusty photo albums, dumping them onto the attic floor. The journals were gone. He knew. The thought was a physical blow. He must have seen that the trunk had been disturbed. He must have checked it after I fled. He knew I had found them. He knew that I knew. My blood ran cold. My disappearance, my flimsy excuses, he hadn't believed any of it. His relief, his kindness, his loving concern for the past day and a half, that was all a performance too. A performance designed to lull me into a false sense of security, to get me to come back home. He wasn't the concerned husband. He was the groundskeeper, realizing the trespasser had found the grapes. And he had just removed the bodies. I stumbled back from the empty trunk, my mind reeling. I wasn't the one in control. I had walked right back into the lion's den, and the lion had just locked the door behind me. I was trapped in this house, in this life, with a man who knew I held his entire world in my hands. And he had just taken away my only weapon. The attic, which had been the site of my discovery, now felt like a cage at the top of a collapsing tower. The absence of the journals was more terrifying than their presence had ever been. They were my proof, my leverage, my grip on a reality that was slipping through my fingers. Without them, I was just a wife with a crazy story. He hadn't just removed the evidence, he had taken my sanity with it. I stumbled down the attic stairs, my mind a frantic scramble. Where would he have put them? Did he destroy them? The thought was a splash of icy water. If he'd burned them, it was over. My truth would be nothing more than ash. Or did he hide them somewhere else? A place he believed I would never look. My eyes darted around our home, the familiar space now a maze of potential hiding spots. Every closet, every floorboard, every crawl space was a question mark. The man I had lived with for over a decade was a stranger, and I had no map to the dark corners of his mind. A new, chilling thought surfaced. His performance over the last day hadn't just been about luring me home. It was a test. He was watching me, waiting to see what I would do, how I would act now that he knew I was a threat. His kindness wasn't kindness, it was surveillance. I had to get out. My plan to retrieve the journals and leave was in shambles. Now, my only goal was to escape before he returned. My car keys, my wallet, they were in my purse on the kitchen counter. I ran down the stairs, my feet pounding a frantic rhythm on the hardwood. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, my eyes fell on the hall table by the front door. Lying on the polished wood surface was a single, small, brass key. It was a key I had never seen before. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It looked old, like a key to a safe deposit box or a padlock, and underneath it was a folded piece of paper. My name, Sarah, was written on it in Daniel's neat, familiar handwriting. My blood ran cold. This was a message, a deliberate, calculated move. He had left this for me to find. He knew I would go for the journals the moment he left. He anticipated my every move. I wasn't a step ahead of him. I was miles behind, walking a path he had laid out for me. With trembling hands, I unfolded the note. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. A crude hand-drawn map of our backyard, the small patch of grass and flowers that I had so carefully tended. There was the deck, the bird bath, the rose bushes, and in the far corner, behind the old oak tree, was a large X. My breath hitched. This was a game. A sick, twisted scavenger hunt. He hadn't destroyed the journals. He was playing with me, tormenting me, dangling the evidence just out of reach. He was showing me how much smarter, how much more in control he was. I looked out the kitchen window into the backyard. It was a bright, sunny morning. The birds were singing, and in the corner of my yard, a place of peace and beauty, my husband had buried his sins. I felt a surge of defiant rage. If he wanted to play a game, then I would play. I walked to the garage, my movements stiff with a cold, desperate purpose. I found the small garden spade I used for planting bulbs. It felt flimsy and inadequate in my hand, a child's toy for an adult's nightmare. I walked out the back door and across the manicured lawn. The air was warm. The sky was a brilliant blue. It was a perfect day for a public unmasking. I reached the old oak tree, its leaves rustling in the gentle breeze.
I looked at the spot marked on the map. The grass was undisturbed, but I knew what lay beneath it. I plunged the spade into the soft earth. The work was slow, agonizing. I was literally digging up the secrets of my own marriage. With each spadeful of dirt, my rage grew. I wasn't just digging for a box, I was digging for the truth, for the woman I had been, for the life he had stolen from me. About a foot down, the spade hit something hard, a dull, metallic thud. My heart leapt into my throat. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the dirt with my bare hands, my nails filling with soil. I uncovered the top of a small metal box, a simple, black, fireproof safe, the kind you buy at an office supply store. And on the front, there was a small brass keyhole. I sat back on my heels, breathing heavily, my hands covered in dirt. I had found it. He had led me right to it. I looked at the box, then back at the house, and a horrifying realization dawned on me. The kitchen window had a perfect view of this exact spot. He wasn't just playing a game with me, he was watching. He had a camera somewhere, or a neighbor, or something else. This whole thing, the key, the map, the digging, it was a performance for him too. He was sitting somewhere, maybe in the clubhouse at the golf course, watching a live feed of his wife on her hands and knees digging up the evidence of his crime. It was the ultimate act of power and control. I looked down at the key in my hand, then at the lock on the box. I had a choice. I could open it, take the journals, and run. Or I could leave it, walk away, and refuse to finish his sick game. But if I left them, he would just move them again. This was my one chance. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my mind racing. I was an actor in a play I didn't know I was in, on a stage I didn't recognize. But I knew one thing. The show had to have a final act, and I was about to write it. The knowledge that he was watching changed everything. The backyard was no longer a private space. It was a stage, and I was the unwilling star. Every move I made, every expression on my face was being observed, analyzed, and probably enjoyed by the man who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare. The game wasn't just about the journals. It was about my reaction. He wanted to see me frantic, desperate, broken. He wanted to watch his puppet dance. A cold, hard fury unlike anything I had ever felt before rose up inside me. It eclipsed the fear, the grief, the confusion. He thought he had all the power. He thought he was the director. But even the most controlling director can't predict what an actor will do when they go off script.
I looked directly at the kitchen window, a placid, unreadable expression on my face. I imagined a camera lens, a cold, unblinking eye, and I stared right into it. I held up the brass key, letting it glint in the morning sun, a small, defiant gesture. Then I lowered my gaze back to the metal box in the dirt. My original plan, grab the journals and run, felt naive now, a child's solution to a monster's game. Fleeing would be an admission of defeat. It would be giving him exactly what he wanted, the thrill of the chase, the confirmation of his power over me. No, I wasn't going to run. I was going to change the ending of his play. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. I lifted the heavy lid of the safe. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were the 5 leather-bound journals. They were real. They were here. My proof, my weapon, my damnation. I took them out, one by one, and laid them on the grass beside the hole. I didn't open them. I didn't need to read the words again. They were seared onto my soul. I left the empty box and the key in the hole, a silent testament to the game we had just played. Then I did something he would never have anticipated. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my knees, picked up the 5 journals, and walked back into the house. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't look for a car title or passport. I walked into our beautiful, sun-drenched living room, the room where we had hosting back on the coffee table in front of me, and I waited. My phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Of course it was. My deviation from his script must have been maddening. He was expecting a frantic escape, a tearful, panicked flight. He was not expecting this quiet, defiant stillness. I ignored the call. It went to voicemail. Another text. What are you doing? I didn't reply. Another text. Sarah, pick up the phone. We need to talk about this. I placed my phone face down on the coffee table. Another call. Ignored. The silence in the house was absolute. I was a statue in a museum of my own ruined life. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my gaze fixed on the journals. They were no longer just evidence of a crime. They were the script for the final act. An act that would take place on my stage, on my terms. After about an hour, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway much too fast, the sound of a car door slamming, the frantic jingle of keys at the front door. He burst into the house, his face a mask of fury and confusion. He was still in his golf clothes, his perfect heroic facade shattered, revealing the panicked, controlling monster beneath. His eyes immediately went to the journals on the coffee table, then to my calm, still face. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I refused to give him the satisfaction of my fear. I refused to play the part of the victim. "You were supposed to take them and run," he said, taking a step closer. It was a confession. He just admitted the whole thing was a setup. "You were supposed to disappear." "That was your story," I said, my voice quiet but as solid as stone. "I'm not in that story anymore. Now, we're going to try mine." He stared at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to calculate this new, unexpected variable. He had lost control of the narrative, and it was driving him insane.
"There is no your story, Sarah," he sneered, his confidence returning, a familiar, ugly mask. "There is only my story, the one the whole world knows. And in that story, I am the hero. And you? You were just the sad, confused wife who was about to have a complete nervous breakdown." He took another step closer, his eyes cold and hard. "Now, give me the journals." I didn't flinch, I didn't move. I just looked past him, toward the front door I had left slightly ajar. "I don't think so," I said, my voice still quiet. "Because in my story, the hero's wife isn't the only one who knows the truth." Right on cue, two figures stepped through the open front door and into the hallway behind him. One was my best friend, Jessica. The other was Liam Miller's father. And in Jessica's hand, she was holding her phone, its camera lens a small, dark recording eye. "Daniel," Jessica said, her voice shaking but clear, "I think you have some explaining to do." The moment Daniel saw them, the color drained from his face. The sneering, confident mask of the villain dissolved, replaced by the wild, cornered panic of an animal caught in a trap. He spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief, first at Jessica, then at the stone-faced, bewildered man standing beside her, Tom Miller, a man who had spent a decade shaking Daniel's hand and thanking him for his son's life. "What is this?" Daniel stammered, his voice losing all its authority, becoming thin and reedy. "What are you doing here?" Jessica said she told me everything. I didn't believe her. I told her she was wrong, that she was having a breakdown. But she asked me to do one thing. She asked me to be here today, and she asked me to bring a friend. My plan had been simple, born of the cold clarity in that motel room. I knew I couldn't be the only one to confront him. My word alone was not enough. I needed witnesses, not for the police, not yet, but for the truth. I had called Jessica and told her a carefully edited version of the story, that I had found things that suggested Daniel wasn't telling the whole truth about the fire, that I was scared, and that I was going back to the house to confront him. I asked her to come, and to bring Tom Miller with her, and to wait down the street until I texted her a single word: now. I had sent the text from the living room while Daniel was on his way home. "This is insane," Daniel said,
turning back to me, his eyes pleading. He was trying to find the adoring wife, the woman who had believed his story for so long. But she was gone. "Sarah, tell them. Tell them you're confused. Tell them you've been under a lot of stress." "I was," I said, my voice clear and steady, as I stood up from the sofa. "But I'm not anymore." I picked up the top journal from the stack. "Why don't you tell them, Daniel? Why don't you tell Tom the real story of how you saved his son?" Tom Miller took a hesitant step forward, his face a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. "Daniel, what is she talking about?" Daniel was trapped. The exits were blocked. The audience was watching. His entire world, the carefully constructed stage he had lived on for 10 years, was collapsing in on him in real time. He looked from the journals in my hand to the recording phone to the face of the man he had so profoundly betrayed. And in that moment, the performer, the hero, the monster, he just broke. He didn't scream, he didn't rage, he simply crumpled.
The confident posture, the heroic jawline, it all just sagged, melting away until all that was left was the small, insecure man from the early pages of the journals. He sank to his knees on our expensive Persian rug, put his face in his hands, and a dry, racking sob tore through his body. It was the sound of a story dying. There was no grand confession. There didn't need to be. His collapse was confession enough. Tom Miller stared, his mouth agape, the horrifying truth settling into his eyes. Jessica slowly lowered her phone, her own face streaked with tears. The play was over. The aftermath was a quiet, ugly affair. There were no dramatic headlines or public trials. Tom Miller, after a long, agonizing week, decided not to press charges. He couldn't bear the thought of putting his son, now a young man preparing for college, through the trauma of learning he was a prop in such a monstrous play. The truth, he decided, would be a more damaging fire than the one Daniel had set. But the town found out, not through the police, but through the quiet, unstoppable force of gossip. Daniel's story unraveled, thread by thread. He resigned from the town council. His name was quietly removed from charity letterheads. The plaque in the town square vanished one night. He wasn't a villain. He was just gone. An erased man. He moved away, and I filed for divorce. I never saw him again. I sold the house and moved to a small, anonymous apartment in a city where no one had ever heard of the Maple Street hero. The journals are in a safe deposit box now. A heavy, leather-bound archive of a life that was never real. I don't know if I'll ever destroy them. They are a part of my story, a reminder that the most celebrated heroes can cast the longest, darkest shadows. I am healing, but I carry the knowledge that stories are powerful, dangerous things, and that you can live inside one for years without ever realizing you're just a character. My husband's story was built on a single defining act, a moment that made him a hero. It leaves me wondering, and I want to ask you, do you believe that a person can be defined by their single worst action? Or does the good they build on top of that lie have any meaning at all?
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.